Cash, and you're locked in. It's been a really exciting week for me. I hope it has been for you as well. This past weekend, I had the unique opportunity to make my way to Greenville, North Carolina. Many of you know that my daughter is enrolled in ECU. She is a freshman, finally left the nest and is down in ECU in Greenville, and I had the chance to go visit with her and just learn more about her school and where she's living. And she walked me around downtown. If you have not been to Greenville, it is certainly worth a quick trip down east to go see Greenville. Nice little downtown area. Got a chance to eat at Winslow's Deli, great food. And just generally, got to see that my daughter is doing good and locking in with her new lifestyle and adjusting to her new home. So that was like really, really cool to be able to do. Certainly the highlight of my entire year was that trip. But I also had another big highlight this past week. The Black Empowerment Network, we held a private screening of Making North Carolina, which is a 6-part docuseries highlighting successful entrepreneurs across North Carolina. I was very fortunate and blessed to be featured in one of those episodes. And so we had about 50 people come out to Camel City Barbecue for that private screening and to learn more about not only some great entrepreneurs in our state, but learn more about my story. And that was a whole lot of fun. And one of the individuals that came out to the show was my good friend, Representative Jeff Zenger. So we were talking this past week. We finally have a state budget. Governor Cooper has signed the first state budget since 2017. It's a $25.9 billion bill. A lot of different pet projects in there, a lot of things that are going to be happening right here in your backyard here at Forsyth County. And so we wanted to get Representative Zenger on the show to talk about the budget and just generally what's going on in Raleigh now that the session is starting to wind down. Representative Zenger, how are you? Thank you for locking in with us.
Hey, I'm doing great, Algernon. It's so good to be here. And I two things before we get started. I want to say I totally enjoyed being there on Monday night to see that screening. And for everybody that's listening and watching, you need to go out of your way to see that. It's fantastic. It was great learning more about Algenon's life and what's going on. And so I really encourage that. The other thing is, Algenon, we have something in common in that my daughter was just accepted to the Physician Assistance Program down at ECU. So she will be starting there in August. So we'll both have daughters down there, and might have to take a road trip down and introduce them and enjoy some of that food together.
Yeah, I would enjoy that. We certainly can. There's a bunch of restaurants down there that I want to try now, and so we have to get down there. And I want to go to a game, basketball game, football game. I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to being that parent that is walking around with my Pirates gear and all that great stuff. So it's exciting time.
So great week. We got a budget, and I brought with me, Algernon. Budget's a small word. Let me just tell you what this thing looks like. Can you see this? This is the budget. And so it was a lot of work with a lot of people that started last January or so. And we really were at a time when it was really kind of a perfect storm. We accumulated some money because we hadn't had a budget. We had a big budget surplus that came in because of our booming economy. And so with all of that combined, it was just a great time for the legislator to sit back and say, okay, what are capital projects? What can we do? I believe, if I remember correctly, and if I make a mistake, I apologize, but there's been so many numbers thrown at me. But I think our total capital projects for the state in this budget is $9.6 billion. And so it's got money in there for just all kinds of things. And Representative Lambeth and Senator Kravick and I, worked together for the Forsyth County delegation to get some stuff for here. And I think there's $307 million in capital projects in Forsyth County.
That's coming just specific to Forsyth County.
Just specific to Forsyth County, $307 million here. That's a lot of projects. And it ranges from all kinds of stuff. I mean, there's $10 million in there for the city of Winston-Salem for affordable housing. Winston-Salem State gets a tremendous amount of money. I don't know, a lot of people don't know this, but the morgue at Wake Forest is the regional one for the West, basically for the whole western part of the state. Vastly outdated. That's getting rebuilt. There's money in there for number of the fire departments so they can buy more equipment. TROSA, which is down there in Kernersville. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they do a drug rehabilitation program, and it's fantastic. But there's $11 million in there for them, and the list kind of goes on and on from there. One thing that I want to make sure everybody understands, this is paid for. The state of North Carolina didn't borrow any money for this budget. In fact, not only is it paid for, but we're put a bunch of money away for our rainy day fund. And it was our rainy day fund that helped us get through COVID. And it pays down about 60% of the state's remaining debt over the next 6 or 7 years.
Yeah, I noticed that the rainy day fund does grow to just around $4.25 billion, in this budget. And that, that has always been a big priority for Republicans. Did you get pushback from Democratic colleagues about trying to put more money in savings, or how tough of a fight was it to actually just save some money? Because sometimes that's a lot tougher than spending it.
Well, I mean, obviously, there is always a little bit of tension between the minority party and the majority party, regardless of whether it's the Democrats in charge or the Republicans in charge. But I will say, and that in this time, the speaker and all of the appropriations chairs really bent over backwards to try to keep the Democrats involved. And so obviously they didn't get every single thing that they wanted. But it was, I think the vote was 104 to 10 in the House. So, that's over 3/4 of their representatives voted for it. And it's just because, it's hard to vote against, water and sewer repair in your own district. You know what I mean? It was that much money that every community was going to benefit. And so it was a great time yesterday after the vote on the floor. The speaker complimented Majority Leader Reeves on his willingness to work with us, and he really walked a tightrope and did a great job. And then a number of people complimented the chairs and stuff. So I'll tell you what, it was a great working relationship. We have a lot of bills that pass a lot, with a great amount like that. Yeah. We got a lot of them that are absolutely, every Republican votes one way, every Democrat votes another way. So when you see a vote that's that much of a majority, that's a good sign.
Yeah, I mean, you guys have done this before, and you've presented budgets that were, somewhat bipartisan in nature, maybe not to this degree. What was so different? I mean, this time around, there was no inclusion of the Medicaid expansion that the governor has sort of been held out on for the past 4 or 5 years. What was so different about this time?
Well, I think everybody recognized, at least the folks on the appropriations committees, that this was going to be a historic time. I mean, it's not very often that you get into state government and you've got $9.6 billion you can spend on capital projects. And so when that started to happen, started to look at it, we started having each county and each representative was putting in, saying, hey, here's what we need in our district. And they started to look at that. I think, like I said, it gets really difficult to say, well, I really wanted X and I didn't get it, so I'm going to vote no. And I think he saw that really reflective in the governor's comments. And he basically said, I didn't get everything I wanted, but boy, there's a lot of good in here. And I think that's what it came down to. And it wasn't a situation where people were boxed out and said, well, we're not doing anything for your community. It went everywhere. And some of those things were just huge. I mean, historically, Black colleges got an unbelievable amount of money. Elizabeth City College, down there in Fayetteville. I mean, it just stuff that's going to benefit all the people. And so it's kind of hard to drive a stake in the ground for that. And I think that's what the difference was.
Well, I mean, there are some increases in there. Representative, I'm getting some feedback in my. Can you hear that when I'm talking, or?
I can hear you fine.
Okay. All right. So I did see there the budget. There also it funds an average 6.7% raise for teachers.
Yes.
As well as state workers would also see a 5% raise. Bonuses for teachers would range from where between $1,000 and $2,850, and then plus a $1,000 bonus, one-time bonus for all state employees. Some people still screaming, that's not enough. We should have done more. What would be your response to them?
Well, we should have done more is, I guess I come from kind of a hard background, and so I would lean more towards gratitude myself. But we did a lot, and all of those raises are retroactive to July 1st, and so there's raises in there for everybody. We upped the minimum wage for the custodial staff at schools and stuff to $15 an hour, and so obviously when we do this budget, the only thing we've got to keep everything in mind, everybody, and so you can't it's not. A lot of times when folks think about their issue, it's like their issue is the only thing. Well, we don't have the ability to say, well, my only issue is I want to make sure that teachers get a raise. We got to think about that. We've got to think about how do we pay for it. We've got to think about what about these schools and all these capital projects and so on and so forth. So when you come out to the whole thing, I think everybody made out great, and every North Carolinian should be absolutely thrilled with this budget.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously, you can never make everyone happy. You always get someone that will have some pushback or think otherwise. And I did see where there is an implementation of a $13 hour minimum wage and then a $15 hour minimum wage for non-certified employees of public schools and community colleges. And as you mentioned, I mean, that's your custodial and your nutritional staff. But that also begs this other question, right? Like you've got locally owned restaurants that are really, really struggling to hire staff. I think they're getting a lot of pressure to grow wages at a time where they probably can't afford it. Some would argue that when the state does what you just did in terms of making the minimum wage $15 an hour for all your cafeteria workers, that it also puts locally owned small restaurants at a disadvantage. What would be your reaction to that comment?
I think right now all businesses are at a disadvantage when it comes to hiring. We're at a point in my life. This year has been the greatest year to go look for a job. It's the best job market. 2021 has been the best job market of all of my adult life. And businesses are struggling. They can't get people to come back to work. And so I think that's something we need to try to deal with. We've had a lot of discussions about it. Here's the hard part is I personally think that it's kind of a crisis of entitlement. We have so much money out there that people can do. We promised them we would keep them whole during COVID. Well, we did, but now COVID's kind of behind us. It's in the rearview mirror. We need to get back at it. And so I don't know what we're going to have to do, but at some point we've got to get people back at it. And so restaurants certainly are, but I've talked to business owner after business owner after business owner that is just begging us, do something. People have got to come back. And what's kind of interesting about that, we have an E-Verify system here in North Carolina, right? So you're supposed to, as a business owner, check to make sure these folks are legitimate so that they don't take the job from somebody in North Carolina. Well, right now, we don't have enough people. So anyway, I think that we're just being competitive at the $13 and $15 an hour. I know in the construction industry, everybody's making $15 an hour or more. So I understand the pinch for the restaurants. I understand the pinch for everybody else.
No, I think your argument is right. Yeah, we've got to continue to try to move in the right direction in terms of minimum wage, and I've long argued that it makes more sense for this debate to be decided at the state and local level and not particularly at the federal level. I don't think we need a $15 an hour federal minimum wage, but maybe that is something that we have to continue to look at here in the state, or we have to look at even more regionally within our state, whether it's down in, the Charlotte region, Raleigh region, or just Triad region, so simply because we do have a lot of rural areas in North Carolina that may not be able to withstand state minimum wage that would be that high. But I do think that we've got to continue to try to improve the quality of life for everyone, all our workers here in the state. But it is creating a tremendous amount of pressure for our small business owners, especially restaurants, at a time where Their food costs is going up through the roof. Sales are pretty much flat because despite the fact the economy is doing so great, people aren't spending money on restaurants. And, while all this is happening, they're also seeing the wage pressure, which is why you're probably seeing, 15, 20% price increases right now at most restaurants when you look at that menu. So we're in certainly a conundrum. From our audience that's just joining us, we do have Representative Jeff Zenger, who is locked in with us today. I appreciate you all for locking in with us. If you've missed part of the conversation, don't forget, you can always go to lockedin.cash. You can check out the podcast. And you can catch this episode if you missed the start of the conversation. Make sure you also subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also check out the behind the scenes video if you also want to see that as well. And then, of course, we're always on Facebook and we're on Instagram, so many places that you can lock in with us. Representative Zenger, another big component within the budget that I would say was probably a priority for Republicans is tax cuts. And so it looks like over the next maybe 4 or 5 years, we're looking to phase out the corporate tax rate. And then over the next 6 years, looking to drop the personal tax rate even further now that we see that the state is so flush with cash. Was that a tough fight for Republicans in the House to keep that in the budget?
No, in fact, what really happened, the budget originated this year in the Senate, and then it came over to the House. And so it was never a question of will there be tax cuts or not tax cuts. It was really more of a debate as to how much, what is the appropriate amount. And so what the House offered and what the Senate offered was a little bit different. But then when, that budget we passed the other day was actually a conference report. And what that was us working out, what those rates were going to be. And so it's just an effort to help keep us competitive here in the Southeast. There's no need for us to tax and take money that we don't need. I mean, that's really, we need to be good stewards up there in Raleigh, and I feel like we have been. And this is the payoff for the taxpayers. I mean, how many times do you have a budget that's completely paid for, puts out $9.6 billion in capital projects so that every community benefits and cuts taxes? It's the perfect storm.
Yeah, and I guess for the audience that's wondering, like, how did this perfect storm happen? At a time where I think the message coming out of government and so many others was that we could be really entering a sort of an economic winter here simply because of COVID and all the business shutdowns. We really thought sales tax revenue was going to take a big hit. People didn't know what was going to happen with property tax revenue, whether or not property owners would be able to pay their taxes. A lot of these predictions didn't necessarily turn out to be true. It actually turned out to be the complete opposite, all the way at the other spectrum. For the audience that's scratching their head on this, I mean, how do we get in this position? And some of the things that we're doing in this budget, is some of this being funded with some of the federal COVID relief money, or is this all actual state money that's funding this $25.9 billion budget?
There's some of it that is some of the federal money that's come in, but the large part of it is ours. What happens when you don't pass a budget, like you had mentioned that it was since 2017, what you do is you revert back to the last budget and you work off of that budget. And that's what's happened. So we've been on the same budget since 2017. Additionally, not all of the economy was depressed during this time. I'm in the building industry, and I just tell you, 2020, biggest year I ever had. 2021, bigger than 2020. I mean, we have just been, as an industry, have just been booming. And so while there's been a portion of our economy that has been stressed, we literally, I can tell you, we literally changed nothing during COVID and ran as hard as we could run. And so that generated a tremendous amount. There was a surplus predicted. We came in way over top of that. So it was kind of like a surprise. Here it is. And so that's kind of how that all came together. And it's just been managing very, very well what the citizens have entrusted to us. And it worked out great.
For the fiscal conservative that might be listening to the show, that may be locked in with us, I can hear them saying, okay, well, if we were working off of this previous budget version, and it seemed to be working fine, the state of North Carolina was still operating, and the trains appeared to be running on time here in the state, and we had a lot of cash going into the bank. Why would we not just go back and keep working off that budget Why do we need a new budget with, greater increases in spending? And when I say explain it to me in a way that the average person can understand that, because it sounds like, hey, the previous budget we were working off of was doing us just fine, and all of a sudden we found ourselves flush with cash. Why would we not keep doing that?
Well, you've got things that change. We talked about, teachers' raises and things like that. Those things, there's pressure on us to do some of those things. Well, the other budget doesn't include that stuff. And so that's part of the reason why we have to adjust it. And then you also have different needs. Our needs in 2021 are different than they were in 2017. And so we go ahead and try to address that. When we saw the amount of cash that we had available to do capital projects, the idea was, well, we've got it now. If we can put these capital projects behind us, it really sets us up in the next budget cycle, because we will have all this stuff done. And so, and I'll say, go back to when you talked about, so you talk about fiscal conservative. I'm conservative. I don't like to borrow money. I don't like to spend money. But the governor did not get his Medicaid expansion. If I had had my preference, we would have paid off all the debt for the state of North Carolina and been walking around completely debt free. So that's just an example of how we trade off.
Yeah, and some of the capital investments that you've talked about or mentioned. I mean, it looks like it's probably, just looking at the budget, it looks like it's probably more around like 5.9 billion that's going into capital projects, which includes about 150 million for repairs to like state buildings and infrastructure, including removing lead paint from schools. And then we also have, somewhere around 878 million that's going into capital projects for state agencies. And then obviously there's a bunch of money in there for renovating state universities and other capital assets. So yeah, I mean, a lot of money, somewhere around 6 billion total that might be going in that direction. Part of, sometimes I scratch my head on this. When I read this and we're spending around $6 billion on it, the bulk of it sounds like it's going towards repairs and deferred maintenance and things that, quite frankly, probably should have been doing along the way. But they've mounted up to where we are now. Now that we're catching these projects up, Representative, how do we some kind of way get back on a track where we are taking care of deferred maintenance items along the way when they should be taken care of, and not just because all of a sudden we found ourselves with a windfall of money in the bank? But it's like, if you and I, if we buy a building together, right? If we buy an investment building together, we're not going to wait 10 years after needing a new roof to put the new roof on. It's going to be something that we're reserving for, and we're doing those maintenance items along the way. How do we get the state back on track the same way we work within the private sector?
Well, I think we are. Keep in mind that when the Republicans took over in 2010, there was a tremendous amount of debt. The state owed federal government, I think, $2.5 billion at the time. They had all kinds of other debt, and some things had been neglected. And so it was a big deal to turn this ship around. And they did. And I don't know if you remember, but when McCrory and Forrest were working on things, they were, Forrest is an architect, so he was talking about, we got to renovate this building, we got to do this, we got to do this, and all that stuff started to rise to the surface. And so as the state has gotten in better financial shape, we've been able to knock that stuff out and deal with that. And I've sat in meetings where we've had conversations with community colleges and with the state college system, university system, and talked about, hey, we need to do better at, just like you said, is we can't do crisis management. We need to do regular management. And I think that's the difference is, and if we can continue on the path that we're on, we should be in a situation where we're not spending nearly as much money on projects, but we're doing it and we're being smart about, okay, this building needs some repairs. We need to get on that now, because now it's going to be $1 million if we don't deal with it. You mentioned a roof. If you wait 10 years on the roof, now you're going to have to repair a roof and a bunch of other stuff, right? And so I think we're moving in that direction. I really do. I think we're in pretty excellent shape.
Yeah, because I just believe if we can get away from crisis management, I think that's a good phrase that you use to describe it. We can start to think more about investing in the future and how do we grow the state in some really creative and innovative ways. how do we, create more connectivity from a transportation perspective between Raleigh, the Triad, and Charlotte, so that we that mobility can be there. How do we enhance our port system so we can continue to compete with the West Coast? How do we just sort of start really moving the state into the 21st and even beyond century, right? And when you're just constantly stuck, trying to patch the roof because you didn't do it, last year, and so now you're doing it this year. You just never get to that point where you can have the big ideas, and that's what I'm hoping for North Carolina, that we can get to that point where we're just focused on or more focused on the big ideas. Another big piece in the budget that my audience should know about, this is something that Republicans have actually been fighting for now since going back to 2020 when the COVID pandemic started. Many have argued that the governor's emergency management powers were too broad, and just too ambiguous. Republicans were successful with getting a provision in the budget that would require the governor to go back to the Council of State and actually seek a vote, not seek consensus, which is what how it's been in the past. But he would actually have to seek a vote from the Council of State in order to maintain a state of an emergency here in North Carolina. A lot of people don't know that we're still under state of emergency right now, and that goes back to March of 2020. And so Republicans in the House and Senate have been seeking to curtail that power for quite some time. It looks like they've been successful. The governor has already said that he's probably going to try to get this solved in court. Representative Zenger, any prediction there? Is that provision going to hold up, or do you see some judicial activism down the road?
Well, I think they probably will try to do some type of judicial activism, but that's good for the state of North Carolina. That's good for the citizens. We actually passed the bill, and it was vetoed earlier in the year, and then they worked it into the budget, and so it came with the budget. But here's the thing: if the government can arbitrarily take power by declaring an emergency, guess what the government's going to do? They're going to declare emergencies. And so we want an emergency. We understand the need for an Emergency Powers Act. We've seen tremendous storms come up and hit the coast and different things. And so we need that. But at the same time, we need to have a check and balance on it. Our entire Constitution is based on checks and balances. So this came along, it was utilized, and here we are 2 years later, or 19 months later, or whatever it is, and we're still under a state of emergency. It's time. If that's needed, that's okay, but there should be somebody else that has to be involved in that decision besides one person. And so I think it's great for the citizens. And listen, the next governor might be a Republican governor. Guess what? He's going to have to go to the Council of States. It's not a partisan thing. It's going to apply to every governor. And so I think it's a good thing. What bothers me is the ability to claim arbitrary power.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I mean, it's a good check and balance to have in the system. I mean, no one, I don't think anyone could have fathomed that year and a half later, we would still be under a state of an emergency, and the governor would have really broad executive powers to, shut businesses down or, put certain kind of mandates in place, which we've all had a real civics lesson here in North Carolina the last year and a half. So, I think some of us might have a master's in it at this point. But Representative Zenger, election season, holiday season is upon us, but election season is also upon us. And I don't think filing has opened quite yet, but I think we're getting very close to that in December. Primary season is right around the corner for all of you political junkies out there like myself. I do think primary day, I think, is in March of 2022. So we're right here at it. Inquiring minds want to know, are you putting your hat back in the ring, or are you ready to come on home?
Well, I tell you what, I love serving. I've served in a number of roles before this. I love representing my constituents, and I love the fact that it's truly a citizen legislature. And so I've really enjoyed my time. I feel like I've got plenty to offer. I've really learned quickly, and there's a lot more that I want to do. So I'm absolutely going to be putting my hat back in the ring. You guys are the first to know. And so we'll be making an formal announcement here in the next couple of weeks. I think filing right now is scheduled for December 3rd at noon, I think is when that starts. I could be wrong, but I think that's when it is. And so, yeah, I'm absolutely all in. And like I said, I've really enjoyed serving down there and really representing our people. And so I thank them all for the privilege of doing it. If it ended, after one term, I would still feel blessed, but I want to go down and do more for our people and do more for the state.
Well, I am so happy to hear that you are running, and because I am a fan. I don't mind sharing that with my audience. I do like the work you've done down there, and have enjoyed just getting to know you, through this whole
Likewise.
process, even when you're on the campaign trail. And now I feel like we've become friends and had many conversations, not just here on air, of course. And so I'm happy to hear it. And I would encourage my audience who don't know you, please go learn more about Jeff Zenger. I'm sure there's a website out there you can go learn more. And if you're heartfelt led to do so, maybe reach out to Representative Zenger and find out how you could support him, whether that might be donate, volunteer, or what have you. He's a very open person, always open to ideas, and someone that you can just sort of sit down and have a conversation with. And I think in this day and time, we need more of that kind of accessibility with our elected officials, just so that we can have that open dialogue. I think that's so important, whether you're Republican or Democrat. So thank you again for locking in. We'll definitely have you back on, as we get into election season. We'll get you back on to talk more about what's going on out there. Thank you for the work you're doing in Raleigh. To my audience, thank y'all for locking in. Don't forget, next week is Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving's coming up. I'm actually going to have Lauren Desai from Aperture Cinema. She's going to be coming on, and she's getting ready to tell us all the holiday movies that you must see after Thanksgiving as we lead into Christmas. So you don't want to miss that next episode. And then coming up after that, we're going to have Representative John Hardister as well as Senator Kravick. We're going to have them on talking about this past session and some of the great things that they felt like they were able to accomplish. Two additional friends of mine. So I'm looking forward to that show. For my audience, if you're not subscribers of the YouTube channel, do so. If you want to become a member, a locked-in member, please reach out to me. Don't forget, everything that we produce, all the content that I do, it's absolutely free to the user. We just want to get the information out there, but it is not free to produce. And so we do so by having subscribers and sponsors and members, and certainly would love for you all to find a way to support what we are doing with our locked-in program. As always, until next time, y'all stay locked in.